Hello, and welcome to Know Before You Go for the 19th Sunday of Ordinary Time. This is a service of the Dominican province of St. Albert the Great, and I'm Father Scott Steinkerchner. We have some lovely images in the readings, and I want to play with these images and let them sink into you so that maybe when you go to church and hear these readings again, they'll really come alive more for you. The first reading is a classic from the book of Kings. The prophet Elijah, he's running away from trouble and he hides in a cave on the holy mountain of Horeb, where God gave the 10 Commandments to Moses. So the Lord said to him, "Go outside and stand on the mountain before the Lord, and the Lord will be passing by." Then a strong, heavy wind was rending the mountains, crushing the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire there was a tiny whispering sound. When he heard this, Elijah hid his face in his cloak and went and stood at the entrance of the cave. Not to be fooled by the flashy wind or earthquake or fire. In this world, people who don't really have power, they give a lot of bluster to make it look like they have power. God speaks with this tiny, small voice. Amidst all of this ruckus, you hear that, you know it's God. And so Elijah comes out to see God. So then, in the gospel, Jesus fed all the people, and he made the disciples get into a boat and row out into the ocean. He went up to pray on a mountain. In the fourth watch of the night, though, a storm came up and was buffeting the ship, and Jesus went walking across the water out to the boat. And when the disciples saw him coming, it said, "It's a ghost!" They cried out in fear. At once Jesus said, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught Peter and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Then he got in the boat, and the wind died down. Again, we have this beautiful image of this storm and darkness around, and the water and the waves. And in the midst of all that tumult, this tiny figure coming toward them, all calm, just walking. Jesus as the calm in the middle of all this tumult. And they respond with more tumult, but then Peter says, "No, let me. Is it? Maybe." And he starts to walk on water. Imagine. But then what happens? He takes his eye off of Jesus and looks at the waves and the storm around him. And he loses faith and starts to sink in the water. But of course, Jesus is still there and just picks him up out of the water. Again, God is that stillness in the middle of a world that is so noisy sometimes, so tumultuous. And we can get carried away with the noise and the power of the world, but the real power is that stillness in the middle. That's what links these stories together. That stillness is God. That still, quiet voice. Where do we say that the voice of God is in us? Well, of course, the Holy Spirit brings it, but it's also being made in the image of God, always in our conscience. That wee little voice inside of us that's always there. It says, no, this is the difference between right and wrong. And we can ignore it because we want and we this and people need and all of this tumult. But the voice of our conscience just sits there oh so quiet. And we can choose to see it and pay attention to it or not. We need to seek that still point to give us the clarity to be able to walk out on that water or stand at the mouth of that cave while God passes by. So the second reading is a very interesting one. It's Paul's letter to the Romans. And Paul says, you know what? I wish, this is true, I wish I would be cut off from Jesus completely if it meant that my Jewish people would be united with him. Because he's all worried about the fact that they, who Jesus is from, who got the revelation, they by and large have rejected him. And what's to become of them? And so he is in this storm of his own worrying about them. In a few chapters, very few, he'll come up with an answer that gives him peace that he shares with the Romans. That, you know what? God could not forsake them. And at the end of time, will bring them back into the fold. It looks bad now, but God's promise to them is forever, and God will find a way to bring them back in. It's a calming idea in the midst of this theological storm of worry. So what I want to say is, there are different ways that God is coming into people's lives, what he's calling them to, but he's always the calmness in the middle of the storm. So, in Elijah's case, God tells Elijah, I'm coming by, come see me, but yeah, wait till it's me. You don't got to walk out in the earthquake or the storm or the fire. When you hear me, that small voice, then come out. Whereas Jesus tells Peter, no, step right on out into the middle of that storm. It's okay, I'm here. So it's an opposite message. And then the second reading with Paul, he says, I am in the middle of a storm, and I got to find my way out of here. And God gives him the ideas and the words he needs to get out of there. So I guess the idea of that one is, if you're in the middle of the storm, stay there and look for the stillness. God is somewhere in the midst of this, not the rage, the still small voice, the whisper. That's God. I hope then this week you can find some stillness in your own life, a chance to listen to that wee little voice that is God, always around us, always inside of us, but sometimes overlooked. God bless you.